might be better off walking to work. It might be the fastest thing.
Check.
Okay, a blessing. Baruch atah Yah Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bakar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Yah noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Okay, let's go to chapter 38, verse 21.
Exodus 38:21. I'll give my usual introduction because I like to. Pekude is the amounts of, so this is kind of where they go in and they count the amounts of everything. But it's the last Torah portion. It's usually added in with last week, but since it's a leap year, we get them both split this year. So this one kind of gets not thought about as much because they're usually together, but it's real short, so we have time. But like the fun part about this one is to just think about the book of Exodus like in a whole. So we start off with we'll even go back to Joseph. Like Joseph is in Egypt and he's living under the reign of this Pharaoh that has a lot of respect for Israel and the people and even like their Elohim. Like it sounds like the Pharaoh that was over Joseph like really respected Yah, and he respected Joseph and his people, and he put him up in Goshen, the best place of all of Egypt, and like had given these people like everything they needed. And then over time, and if you read Jasher, it'll tell you there were 3 other pharaohs after him, and it wasn't until the 3rd one that really had a despise for the Israelite people, and he started to come against them, and slowly like he put Egyptians, like they worked together with the Egyptians to build things, but then slowly he was putting the Egyptians over them, and they became the, like their bosses, and then eventually they just became slaves, and it like was a slow progression into slavery. So at the beginning of this book, it's like kind of split into 2. Like we have the Exodus out of Egypt, and we have the people in building the tabernacle. Like that's the whole book of Exodus basically. So at the first of it, we have all the people, they leave there. We see the splitting of the Red Sea, the plagues, the splitting of the Red Sea, the people kind of rebel. We get the 10 Commandments, the golden calf, and then the building of the Mishkan. Like that's the total of the book. But I wrote up on there what Randy just erased, that it's okay, it doesn't matter. But it was Navashev and Nishma, like that's the middle of this book, 19 verse 8, where like, and I think it's like the theme of this entire book. It's before they know all the instructions of what's going to happen, and all the people say, like, we will obey everything you say. So that's kind of the...
I'm sorry, I mean, that's...
No, it's okay. I mean, I remember what it said. But I just wrote it up there because it's just saying, like, we will, like, that's, like, dead center of the book of Exodus. The people don't know all the commandments and how to implement them yet, but that is the theme, I think. Like, Hebrew is all about chiasms, and, like, the center of everything is the meaning of that chiasm. So, like, from chapter 15 back in Teruma, you'll see that, like, they start the process of building the Mishkan. Yah says, build me a Mishkan. And then through those next 15 chapters, it's all about building the Mishkan, but there's a huge chiasm throughout of it where you see Moshe go up, there's a fire on the mountain, he comes down, and, it just goes through this chiasm. In fact, I got it written down. Where you can kind of see, like, just the progression and how Yah wants us to think through these stories. So we have Yah's presence on Mount Sinai. He's up there. There's a fire amongst the people. He comes down. He commands the people to build a tabernacle and to observe the Sabbath. He goes back up, and you see the golden calf incident. So they sin. He comes immediately back down. He tells them to observe the Sabbath again, so they're correlating together. He tells them again how to build the tabernacle, and then Yah's presence in the tabernacle. And then there's a fire again coming down. So this is just a interesting way to like think about how these stories are supposed to be thought about. But I'm gonna start reading. I think Randy wants.
If we look at the time frame, We came out of Egypt in 2448, and from Adam. And we came out on the 15th of Aviv, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 50 days, we get to Mount Sinai, Sivan the 6th, Shavuot, Feast of Weeks. Then Moses goes up on the mountain, he comes back the 9th of Av, he comes down, we have the sin of the golden calf. We had another couple of things in the summertime. Then he comes down the third time at Yom Kippur. And then after Sukkot that year, we started building the Mishkan. The next 6 months, we were building the Mishkan, and on Aviv 1, the first of Aviv, in the year 2449, we set up the temple. So we spent 6 months. First 6 months is all the experiences, and then the bad times. And then we built the Mishkan, and now we're in the year 2449 from Adam. We just set up the Mishkan, and that's where we are now. We're talking about Basal. We're going to talk about finishing the tabernacle equipment and getting everything ready and setting it up. That's where we go today. Okay, Johnny, or who's reading? Johnny, okay.
These were the appointments of the dwelling place of the witness, which was appointed by the mouth of Moshe for the service of the Levites by the hand of Itamar, son of Aaron, the priest, and Bezalel, son of son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda, made all that Yah had commanded Moshe, and with him Oholiab, son of Ashimach, the tribe of Dan, an engraver and designer and embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet material and in fine linen, all the gold prepared for the work and the work of the set-apart place. And it was the gold of the wave offering came to be 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the sequel of the set-apart place. And the silver from the ones counted of the congregation was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the shekel of the set-apart place, and half a shekel for a head, according to the shekel of the set-apart place, for everyone passing over to those counted from 20 years old and above, for 603,550 men.
So if you looked at how much of all the gold that was used for all the tabernacle, and I figured it up this morning, based on the price of gold today, it would be $240 million. That would be today's price of gold. Just gold alone. That's not the silver or bronze. But
Wow.
$240 million. I mean, and the weight of it was, like Mary just said, was 6,150 pounds.
Well, just for the 100 talents, 1,775 shekels is 6,650 pounds.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
like I said, if you do that by today's price standard of gold at $69 a gram, you figure that out, it's like $240 million.
And then take Solomon, he built 10 of each one of the things. So he had so much gold in there, it wasn't even funny. And none of that was actually taken. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about the crimson wool, scarlet wool. So the Hebrew, it gives a color. It's like, okay, so we talk about seed, it says, you'll always say, most of your seeds are always wool. But then it'll tell you not to mix linen and woolen together. The tekelet, they'll translate tekelet as a blue wool. But it doesn't say wool, it just says blue. It gives a color, but it don't say what it is. And so many times they'll translate something as scarlet wool or blue wool, and that's not what it's just given a color. Because there's an argument of whether or not you can put wool seed on a linen tunic or a linen katan. And people say, well, you don't make katans out of linen, but that's not true. The priestly garments were made out of linen. And so did they put wool? And you get this, and the funny thing is we can't answer it because the rabbis can't answer it. They've been arguing in the Talmud over it. And so just recently, Now there's places where you can actually buy tekelet in linen. So like if somebody has a katan or something you've made out of linen, you got a prayer shawl you've made out of linen. A lot of your prayer shawls are wool, and a lot of them are just the garments that are underneath the wool or linen. What's that stuff called?
Well, silk or acetate, rayon.
Okay. So, but if it's made out of wool, you can't put linen on it. But if it's made out of linen, you can't put wool on it. And so, but now you can get the tekelet tzitzit made from linen garment, made from linen.
I was just wondering because I thought it was like wool and linen being woven together, like making a shirt out of both materials because it cancels them out.
Right.
They also tear apart. They won't stay together.
But now the argument you're talking about, okay, so this, some of the rabbis say, well, that's in the garment itself. So you can put the woolen tzitzit on a linen garment. Then another rabbi said, no, it's not something we can answer. This is something that they've been arguing about for years. And it's all in the Talmud. But what I am trying to say is too many times they'll translate something as scarlet wool, and it just says scarlet. Or it says tekelet. And Judaism does the same thing with when the Jews left Egypt. No, when Israel left Egypt. And we do the same thing with Passover. We call the wheat Pesach. It's not Pesach. The Pesach is only the lamb. So what I'm saying is sometimes if we go back technically literally in our wording, then it's not as confusing, especially if people are just coming into it. John in the New Testament calls the Passover the wheat. I mean, it's all Passover. And but the Passover is only the lamb, the Pesach. Oh, he's having fun, isn't he? That's good. Okay. Let's go down then to, but anyways, when it says scarlet wool in the rabbinic translations in the Art Scroll, you might want to go look at what it's actually saying. Most of the time it's just given a color. Now I'm not saying there isn't places where it does say scarlet wool or blue wool, but most of the time it's just given a color. It's not actually saying this has to be out of wool. It's just saying it's blue or it's red or whatever. Okay, Johnny, what verse we're on?
27.
Okay.
And the 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the set-apart place and the base of the veil, 100 sockets from the 100 talents, a talent for each socket, and one of the 1,775 shekels. He made hooks for the columns and overlaid their tops and made bands for them. And the bronze of the wave offering was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. And with it he made the sockets for the door and the tent of the appointment and the bronze slaughtering place and the bronze grating for it and all the utensils for the slaughtering place and the socket of the courtyard all around and the base for the courtyard gate and all the pegs for the dwelling place and all the pegs for the courtyard all around.
Okay, let's talk about the half shekel. Now, one of the verses we read before said when you count the people, each person's throw a half shekel and for the ransom of their soul that there be no plague among you. Okay, the half shekel is kind of funny because the Temple Institute back in 2020, for the first time I ever saw, they started saying, okay, we're going to take up the half shekel tax, that there be no plague among you. That was in early spring of 2020, and what came out in 2020 was the whole COVID thing, the plague. And I thought, that's kind of interesting, because that was the first time they actually called it a half shekel tax. And it said that there be no plague among you. And then when COVID hit, and I'm not even going to go into the context of that. But my point is that the half shekel, we have last Shabbat, the Shabbat right before Adar, the Adar that has Purim in it. If we have a leap year, then that's Adar 2. Purim is always the month right before Passover. And Shabbat Shekalim is the half shekel. That's the Shabbat right before Adar starts. So if we look on the calendar, we got Passover in the month of Aviv Nisan. Right back here at the beginning of Adar, we have Shabbat Shekalim. What does the half shekel pay for? Now, we go to Numbers chapter 28 and 29, it gives you a list of communal offerings. And the first thing people need to understand about a sacrificial system is you've got to understand communal and personal. There are all kinds of personal offerings that you are obligated for, but there are communal offerings that the state, the country, the group, people are obligated for. Those communal offerings are paid for with the temple tax. Every single morning, there's a lamb offered at the third hour of the day. Every afternoon, there's a lamb offered at the ninth hour of the day. And then, if it's Sabbath, there's 2 more additional lambs. Then, if it's Rosh Kodesh, there's other additional offerings. And so, all of those offerings that are paid for by the community are paid for with the temple tax. Now, we go back 2,000 years ago, the temple tax, they would gather the taxes for right now, and at Nisan 1, they would start buying all the offerings for the next year. They would usually wait till right up till Nisan 1, and they had all the offerings ready. Then they would pay for them and buy them and start using them. All the old money that they had left over from the year before, they would invest in upkeep of the highways. Now, think about this for a minute. In Israel, you're coming out of the wintertime for Passover, right? Okay, what happens in the wintertime? That's when you get all your rain. That's when, now, in modern days, imagine, okay, you guys remember back when it froze over so bad, right? You seen what it did to the roads. So now, what it immediately did, as soon as it warmed up, they fixed, redone every highway. It just tore the roads all up. They got so frozen down so deep. So imagine in Israel now, we don't have blacktop, but now we got the roads, people walking, coming to Jerusalem for the festivals. They have to go out and the winter rains, wash everything out. They got to go now hire people to straighten the roads up, get everything straightened out. And there's something else they do. There's something that they have to do to keep you from becoming unclean. What's that? They had to whitewash every grave. You remember Yeshua in the New Testament talks on the whitewashed sepulchres. Okay, that's not good. I mean, it's not that it's bad. They have to go out anywhere coming into Israel, Jerusalem, they have to mark every grave. If you knew a grave, you had to whitewash it so people didn't step on a grave. If you step on a grave, you're unclean. For not just 7 days, you're unclean until you're purified with the ashes of red heifer. So there are certain things that make you unclean for a long period of time, and those you have to be purified for. So they would go out. And so they would use this money, the half shekel, they would fix the roads. They would make sure everything was up to par for everybody coming in Jerusalem. Now, this tax wasn't just a once-a-year tax. It could be. Some years, it may have went all the way. If they needed it right in the middle of the year and needed to do it again, they could do it again. But everybody had an equal share. The rich didn't have more, and the poor didn't have less. So that's the best part about a half shekel tax. Everybody had an equal share in it. And Yeshua, now let's go back to the offerings. Every morning, the third hour of the day, the morning lamb is offered. Every afternoon, the ninth hour of the day, the afternoon lamb was offered. Yeshua was crucified. He was taken, and it says in the New Testament, the third hour of the day, morning lamb, and then he died at the time of the afternoon lamb, at the ninth hour of the day. So he represents that morning and afternoon sacrifice. How many other sacrifices can you think that he represents? Spiritually. I'm not saying physically. You guys remember when Pilate says, who do I release to you? Yeshua or Barabbas? So now they said, release Barabbas. So now we got the 2 goats for Yom Kippur. Now I'm not saying Pilate was Kohen Gadol. I'm not saying that. But I am saying Yeshua represents those 2 goats for Yom Kippur. The one for Yod Vavhe was slaughtered immediately. And the other one was taken out in the wilderness and let go. But the problem is, when you know what happened to that second goat, he wasn't let go. I guarantee you Rome probably followed him and caught up with him somewhere and put him down, because that's what happened to the second goat. He was actually brutally murdered. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is all those offerings in one way or another represent Yeshua, the communal offerings. But then we have individual offerings. The half shekel paid for the communal offerings. And then at the end of the year, whatever was left over went into upkeep of the temple. And then they had what they called desserts of the altar. Desserts of the altar where they had plenty of extra money left over. The sacrifices are not going there's a few sacrifices, not that big a deal. So they'll throw a few extra sacrifices on there to encourage the people. There's something else they would do. They would let the ash on the altar. Now, every day they had to remove a shovelful of ash off the altar, symbolic, but they didn't clean the altar every day. Sometimes they'd let the ash build way up. Why would they do that? People coming into town, say you were a Hellenistic Jew from Rome, like Paul, come from Rome or something, and he comes into town and he sees the altar and he's got ash 6, 8 foot high on the altar. It's kind of encouraging, like, wow, look at all the offerings people are making on the altar. So a lot of times they did that psychologically to encourage people to make those offerings. So anyway, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of the half shekel, what it was used for and how it was used. Does that help a little bit? Kind of understanding? The more you understand about the sacrificial system, then when people come up with nonsense, you can put a stop to it. Like, for instance, when they say Yeshua, the priests were out there with Yeshua when he was crucified. And when they stabbed him with the sword, the blood came out and got on the priest, and then they went into the Holy of Holies. Number one, that's total nonsense. Number two, they didn't wear their garments outside the temple. They couldn't. Yeshua was crucified outside the temple. Their garments have to stay in the temple. So when people start coming up with nonsense, it's easy to put a stop with it when you understand the sacrificial system. You can say, no, that didn't happen. Or when they say the Kohen Gadol wore a rope on his ankle when he went into the Holy of Holies. No, it didn't. It did not happen. We know it didn't happen because he's not allowed to do that. And because you couldn't hear the bells regardless. So anyway, once you understand the system, that's why I keep going over this and over. Okay, let's go on down now to chapter 39.
Shemot, Exodus 39, verse 1. And of the blue and purple and scarlet material they made woven garments to do service in the set-apart place. And they made a set-apart garment, which were for Aharon, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And he made the shoulder garment of gold, of blue and purple and scarlet material, and of fine woven linen. And they beat out sheets of gold and cut it into threads to work in with the blue and the purple and the scarlet material and the fine linen, the work of a skilled workman. They made shoulder pieces for it to join it, was joined at its two edges, and the embroidered band of his shoulder garment that was on it was of the same work of gold and blue and purple and scarlet material and of fine woven linen, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And they made the shoham stones set in plated work of gold, engraved as signets are engraved, according to the names of the sons of Israel. And he put them on the shoulders of the shoulder garment, stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And he made the breastplate, a work of a skilled workman, like the work of a shoulder garment, of gold, of blue and purple and scarlet material, and of fine woven linen. It was square. They made the breastplate double, its length a span, its width a span, doubled. And they filled it with 4 rows of stones. A row of ruby, topaz, and of emerald was the first row, and the second row a turquoise, a sapphire, and a diamond. And the third row a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row a beryl, a shoham, and a jasper, set in plated work of gold in their settings. And the stones were according to the names of the sons of Israel, 12 according to their names, engraved like a signet, each one with its own name according to the 12 tribes. And they made braided chains of corded work for the breastplate at the ends of clean gold. And they made 2 settings of gold and 2 gold rings, and put the 2 rings on the 2 ends of the breastplate. And they put the 2 cords of the gold and the 2 rings on the ends of the breastplate. And the 2 ends of the 2 cords they fastened in the 2 settings, and put them on the shoulder pieces of the shoulder garment in the front. And they made 2 rings of gold and put them on the 2 ends of the breastplate, on the edge of it, which was on the inward side of the shoulder garment. And they made 2 gold rings and put them on the 2 shoulder pieces underneath the shoulder garment, and on the front of it, close to the seam above the embroidered band of the shoulder garment. And they bound the breastplate by means of its rings to the rings of the shoulder garments with a blue cord, so that it would be above the embroidered band of the shoulder garment, and that the breastplate would not come loose from the shoulder garment, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And he made the robe of all the shoulder garment of woven work, all of blue. And the opening of the robe was in the middle, like the opening in the scaled armor, with a woven binding all around the opening, so that it would not tear. And they made on the hem of the robe pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet material twined. And they made bells of clean gold and put the bells between the pomegranates on the hem of the robe all around between the pomegranates. A bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, all around the hem of the robe for the service of Yah, as commanded Moshe. And they made the long shirt of fine linen, the work of a weaver, for Aharon and his sons, and a turban of fine linen, and the turban ornaments of fine linen, and short trousers of fine woven linen, and a girdle of fine woven linen with blue and purple and scarlet material, the work of an embroiderer, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And they made the plate of the set-apart sign of dedication of clean gold, and wrote on it an inscription like the engraving of the signet, set-apartness to Yah.
Stop just a second. So I don't know if you all have ever noticed, or if you've looked closely, I tried to model the ephod up there as much after the description in the scriptures and what's up at the, that they have at the Temple Institute. And if you look at the bottom, right under Levi's name, there is a row of bell, pomegranate, woven. So you might, if you want to get an idea of what that looks like when we're done, you might want to go up and look at that. Because I copied the ones that they had at the Temple Institute as closely as I could.
Except the bells are different. The bells were solid.
No, the bells are the same as the ones here, but the bell that they found is different. So like the Temple Institute has the same kind of bell on it that I have on mine. But the bell that they found archaeologically is like a clamshell closed bell with a little flapper inside.
That was actually the first one you made, wasn't it?
I tried to make it close so we could use it for a teaching tool for like the children to look at and understand.
So then we had the seat plate, holy to Yah, Yodivavhe. Now, I tell you what, this is one that we really need to think about. Where do you wear the seat plate? On the forehead. Think about the things we wear on our forehead. Think about all the ball caps and some of the things we, Margaritaville, but holy to Margaritaville. No, I mean, really, sometimes we just don't think about what we do. And the Kohen Gadol, the symbolism was, everything's holy to Yah. Now, outside the temple, he couldn't wear any of that. He wasn't allowed to take that outside the temple area, only in the temple area. And, okay,
Verse 31.
31.
And they put on it a blue cord to fasten it above the turban, as Yah had commanded Moshe. And all of the work of the dwelling place of the tent of appointment was completed. And the children of Israel did according to all that Yah had commanded Moshe. So they did. And they brought the dwelling place of Moshe, the tent and all of its furnishings, its hooks, its boards, its bars, and its columns, and its sockets, and the coverings of ram skin, dyed red, and the covering of fine leather, and the veil of the covering, the ark of the witness with its poles, and the lid of atonement, the table and all of its utensils, and the showbread, the clean lampstands with its lamps, the lamps to be put in order, and all its utensils, and the oil for light, and the slaughter place of gold, and the anointing oil, and the sweet incense, and the covering for the tent door, the bronze slaughter place, and its bronze gratings, its poles, and all of its utensils, the basin with its stand, the screens of the courtyard, its columns and its sockets, the covering for the courtyard gate, its cords, its pegs, and all the utensils for the service of the dwelling place, for the tent of appointment, the woven garments to do service in the set-apart place, the set-apart garments for Aharon the priest, and his sons' garments to serve as priests, according to all that Yah had commanded Moshe. So the children of Israel did all the work. And Moshe looked over all the work and saw that they did it as Yah had commanded. So they had done, and Moshe blessed them.
Okay, so who's all this work put under so far? Start off in the very first paragraph. All the work was put under which one of Aaron's sons? Ithamar. all the work of the Levites was put under the work of Ithamar. Now, later on, we're going to see how it's all divided up. When the sacrificial system starts, these two get struck dead immediately. We're going to come across that Torah portion here before too long. I think the second one of Leviticus. And then that leaves Aaron with two sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. Most of the tent and all the stuff like that is put under Ithamar. The gold stuff in the Holy of Holies is put under Eleazar. And that's important because later on you're going to find out in Ezekiel's temple that only the sons of Zadok get to work on the inner sanctuary, and they are descended of Eleazar. And not only that, you guys remember Eleazar's son that's mentioned, remember Pinchas? Pinchas went in, he kills the woman and the guy in the act of fornication, or whatever they're doing, and God gives him a covenant of peace, but not yet. It's got in the Hebrew, it's got a shalom with a, with a broken vav in the Torah scroll. And so some people translate, you're going to give a covenant of peace, but not yet. It's for later on. And so this covenant of peace is carried out in the millennial in Ezekiel's temple through the sons of Zadok. They are the sons of Eleazar, the sons of Pinchas. And so when you start understanding all the genealogies, and then you start understanding why certain people were put in charge of different things, he already knew. He already knew it was coming. Did he already know that these two were going to be struck dead? Probably.
The Sanhedrin, they are the sons of Zadok? Or are they potentially the sons of Zadok? The
Who?
Sanhedrin that acting today?
Okay, hold on. Let's talk about the Sanhedrin for a minute. We got plenty of time, so let's talk about that. No, the Sanhedrin don't mean priesthood. It don't mean anything. It just means rulers. So it could be, some from all tribes. Now, does it mean that some of the sons of Zadok could be on there? Absolutely, but they're not all priesthood.
I thought that the sons of Zadok were the Zakim, aka the Sadducees.
I'm sorry, one more time.
The sons of Zadok, I thought that they were the Zadokim, which were the Sadducees.
They were for the second temple, but Ezekiel talks about in the millennial temple, only the sons of Zadok get to work in the inner sanctuary. Let me get a copy of the temple here.
The Sadducees didn't believe in the world to come.
Okay, so 2,000 years ago, the word Sadokim, the sons of Zadok, the Sadokim, Sadoki, later on became the Sadducees. That's where we get the word Sadducees derivative from. And that blew my mind when the first time I read that. I was like, okay. So the priesthood, and that's what the New Testament says, the priesthood, they were the Sadducees, most of them. Why? They had the best job in the world. Think about it. They worked with God. They worked at the temple. To them, this was heaven on earth. But the poor people, the Pharisees, were like, oh, God, there's got to be more than this. And so, but the sons of Zadok, that is where the word Sadducee came from the Sadokim, the Sadducees, Sadoki. And so anyways, that's what you're talking about, is that in 2,000 years ago, but let's back up even before that. After King Solomon, his son, Rehoboam, and Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a servant of Solomon, but God gave him 10 tribes, and they went to the north. That's when the nation split. So they came to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and they said, are you going to be as hard on us as your father was with taxes, or are you going to make it lighter on us? So Rehoboam, he goes to his counselors. The old men in his council said, you better let up on them. Solomon taxed them to death. You got to let up on them, or they're going to rebel. The younger people said, no, you tell them you're going to be 10 times harder than Solomon was. So he told them, he sided with the young council, told the guys, we're going to be harder than something my dad ever was. And so the northern kingdom left. They split off. They were tired of all the excess taxation. And that's what it was. But God intended for it to happen. And so anyways, at that point, somebody went with the northern kingdom. Now, we had to back up 40 years before that to know who went with the northern kingdom. 40 years before that, on David's deathbed, we had Zadok, T-S-A-D-O-C, Zadok, or Z-A-D, Zadok, however you want to pronounce it. But Zadok was of the genealogy of Eleazar. Now, there's several Zadoks in there, but the Zadok we're talking about, because there's some on each side. But this Zadok, the son of Eleazar, and then over here we had another one called Abiathar. And Abiathar was a descendant of Ithamar. The Kohen Gadol position was going back and forth. Sometimes Zadok would be Kohen Gadol, sometimes Abiathar would be Kohen Gadol, and they went back and forth. But after King Solomon, when David was on his deathbed, Abiathar went with Adonijah, David's other son. And Zadok, Beniyahu, 3 or 4, and Nathan the prophet, they went with Shlomo. And Shlomo became king, and this one was thrust out, never became Kohen Gadol again. And so he was still a Kohen, but he wasn't Kohen Gadol. So can you imagine having the most elite job you could have, and then all of a sudden being thrown down to the normal Kohen, which that's still a great job, don't get me wrong. But my theory is, and it almost says this in Ezekiel, he's the one that went with the northern kingdom because now he had authority again. And they started doing offerings up there instead of coming back down the temple. That's what Jeroboam tried to do. He didn't want the people going back to the temple because he's afraid they'd join back with Israel. They're joined back together. So anyways, the split happened between David and Solomon, and then 40 years later with Rehoboam, permanent split. And that's what Ezekiel's talking about. Because it says the Levites that went astray with the northern kingdom, so that's where we get the Zadokim, are from Pentecost, but they're in the millennial temple. So even though 2,000 years ago, now how do you know the priesthood 2,000 years ago was Zadokim? How do you know they were from Eleazar? There's an easy way. Think about it for a second. How do you know that the Kohen Gadol specifically, how do you know he was a legitimate Kohen Gadol? Because you're going to have people tell you that was a false priesthood, they had no business being there. No, that's not true. You can't prove that. We know for a fact he was real because Scripture tells us he's real. You know who it was? Who is to oversee the burning of the red heifer? Eleazar. When we get to Numbers, when we get to Paradamah, the red heifer, it says Eleazar is to watch. He's not to participate, he's just to watch and oversee the burning of the red heifer. Yeshua was crucified where the red heifer was burnt. The priesthood sat there and watched him, the Kohen Gadol specifically. They saw him. So because of that alone, it fulfills that prophecy in Numbers that Eleazar is to watch the burning of the red heifer. So therefore we know that priesthood 2,000 years ago was a correct priesthood. I'm not saying they were righteous, but I'm saying bloodline, they were correct.
So we currently have the red heifers in Israel right now, 5 or 6 of them, and they're pretty close to.
No, they're ready. If they don't use one of them, within 6 months, I think it's going to be, can't use it.
So they're ready. So is there going to be someone who will be as Eleazar in this sacrifice, or in this burning of the red heifer, or does it not matter?
They'll be the sons of Zadok, yes. I think.
So, and you got the acting Sadducees there.
You got all the Cohen. And the Cohen have all been blood typed. There's 2 different main lines. There's the C1, the Cohen model haplotype, that's the 85% of them, but then there's the R1b Cohen group that's like 8%. And so the 2 biggest groups have already been identified. They've been blood typed. DNA, everything's checked out. They're ready to go. And they know they're legit. So once the sacrifices start, we'll know if they are the true legitimate Kohanim, because they get anywhere as close to some of that stuff, you get death penalty if you're not a Kohen. So anyway, let's talk about that now. So the number one thing people are missing, okay, so Christians are waiting for a temple. Forget the temple. All that's going to happen is the sacrificial system will start. And when it starts, if you got this prophetic timeline and prophecy go ahead and start your clock because it's ticking down now. So, and the reason we know that is because they clearly said that all they need is 8 days for a sacrificial system. That's it. Now, they'll start building the temple. I'm not saying they won't, but the temple is irrelevant. The only thing that's important is the altar. Now, how do we know all of that takes place before Yeshua returns? Because it's clear as a bell. In Matthew 24, is it 23 or 24, it says, that day and hour no man knoweth, right? Okay. With that phrase right there has to be a Sanhedrin. Otherwise, because we're talking about Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, we know exactly when it's going to be with a calendar. But he's telling us before Yeshua returns, there will be a Sanhedrin that will be setting the calendar. The Sanhedrin says the same thing. Not that Yeshua is going to return, but they say Elijah comes before a defunct Sanhedrin. It's there, but it's not operating, and he gives it power. Now we're putting everything together. Elijah comes before Yeshua. Yeshua is going to come, we know, at one Yom Teruah in the future, but before that, Elijah is going to come and set back up the system, because then we're going to start, we won't, but they will. They're going to start spotting the new moon again, correct? And that's what Winona and Nicole, give me a second, I got a lot of people. Winona and Nicole are working on this Rosh Kodesh thing, so you understand now why it's so important for our children to understand what that actually means. Because in the future, we're not going to have a calendar. We're going to have the sighting of the new moon. Every month will be done by the sighting of the new moon.
Which they're doing that now in Israel, correct?
Well, they're sighting it, but they're not actually using the calendar yet. But they are going out and sighting it, Winona.
So the Sanhedrin, that will be mostly comprised of people from Zadok then, right? Because before it was comprised of Sadducees mostly too. So it would be sons of Zadok that would have to be on the Sanhedrin.
No, the Sanhedrin is just the leadership. Not necessarily. Okay, remember, the Sanhedrin is just the 70 elders. Now, the Zadok can be on that court, but they don't have to be. It's like the Kohen Gadol, he might be part of that court, but he may not be. But that's just the leaders of Israel. But let's talk about spotting the new moon for a second, because, we get too many people doing their own calendars and stuff. First of all, we do not have authority to set our own calendar, because certain offerings have to be made every single day at the temple. And if we, at the temple, when they see the new moon, then they declare this is Rosh Kodesh, that's the first day of the month. That will affect what day Yom Kippur is on. It'll affect all those holidays. And so, but it can only be done by court at the temple. It can't be done by NASA in Arkansas. Well, I mean, seriously, because we got too many people that are going on NASA website and said, oh, the Jews have missed it because this should have been Rosh Kodesh 2 days ago. It don't matter. It does not matter. If they're wrong on the calendar, we are guiltless because we don't have that responsibility. And I have a different situation on that anyway. There's what now?
2 Jewish calendars, and that different people use different ones.
Okay, hold on. The majority of the people follow, it's called the Hillel second calendar. Is that right? Let's talk about the calendar for a second. First of all, is the calendar correct? It don't matter. It really doesn't matter. 2,000 years ago, they knew they were going to be scattered throughout the whole world. They had a calendar already. They knew within minutes of when the new moon was supposed to be seen. And when they would bring people in at the Sanhedrin, they would bring people in and say, where did you see the new moon at? When they were questioning them, they already knew where it was at. The court knew exactly where it was at. They knew what constellation it was in. They didn't even have to see it because it was already calculated. So when the Jews were fixing to be scattered throughout the whole world, they said, okay, we're not spotting the moon no more because our people are going to be scattered. So we've got to set up a calendar for our people to follow. And that's why they went to the Hillel 2 calendar. But at the same time, they're waiting for Messiah to come and set it straight. They don't say that this calendar overrides Yeshua. They're not saying any of that. They're saying we set a calendar up to keep our people as uniform as possible through the diaspora. And that's what it's about. Now, as far as one or two calendars, here's the deal. King David, he ate the showbread, and he wasn't punished. Why? This is the best part. He ate the showbread because the priesthood gave it to him. The next chapter, 85 of those priests were put to death. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is people say David ate the showbread because he was king. No, he didn't. Because Uzziah, he was one of David's sons, and he was a great king. But Uzziah went in to burn incense, and he was struck dead with leprosy immediately. So David didn't eat the showbread because he was king. That's not why David ate the showbread. David didn't eat showbread because he was starving. He was starving, but he ate the showbread because the priests give it to him. And the priests are the one that hold the responsibility, and they were all punished. So what I'm trying to tell you with that same thing of line of understanding is if Judah is doing something wrong on the calendar, hey, I'm guiltless. That's what Yeshua is saying in the New Testament with David. I'm guiltless. That's their responsibility. Now, I'm going to say this. I don't think it matters because he's on a different calendar than any of us are on. We have 1 year as a day and 1,000 years as a day. The Father is in the very top calendar. 1 day for us, 1,000 years for us is just 1 day for him. And then the next realm above us, 1 year for us is 1 day in that realm. We're on the lowest of the lowest. And I don't think it has anything to do with his calendar. He says, when you make your offerings, you blow the trumpets over the offerings. So Rosh Hashanah, the Sanhedrin sets up, they declare Rosh Hashanah, they blow the trumpets, and he says, oh, the children of men are keeping Rosh Hashanah. Okay, let's go visit them. You follow what I'm saying? Now people say I'm crazy. No. If he says meet you here at this date, he's going, no. That was given to a group of people that had authority. I do not have that authority. If I take authority upon me that I don't have, now I'm taking a burden that's not mine. It's not my responsibility. If I'm ever on the Sanhedrin, then I may have a chance to prove my point of view, which I don't disagree with them anyway. But my point is that things have to be done properly. Now, Yeshua proves what I'm saying with one simple quote. In the New Testament, there was one man, he said, had more faith than all of Israel, everybody had ever seen. Who was it?
Centurion?
Why? He understood something that nobody else understood. He understood authority. The centurion said, I'm not worthy for you to even come into my house. If you just speak it. He said, I'm over hundreds of people. If I tell them to do something, they do it. And if you speak it, then it will happen. And so Yeshua said, I've not found any greater faith in all of Israel. If someone, and you can take faith whatever you, but he understood authority. That's the main thing. Now with that understanding, let's go a step further. Gentlemen, you're not going to like this. And ladies, I'm not offending you, but listen carefully what I'm saying. So Beth and I walk in and she's doing something that might be controversial as far as keeping Torah. If I've got doubt, I say, babe, don't do that. If she does it anyways, and if it's wrong, he holds her accountable. But if I walk in and she's doing it and that's not right, but I ain't going to say anything, you don't want to make her mad, then he holds me accountable. So men, you've got to understand. Now, I'm not saying that's not nothing with chauvinistic feminism or anything like that. I love my wife. I respect her Torah. But we have two different kinds of understanding. A mother and a father. And children need the daddy and the mama. They need both. They need that balance. That's what builds good, healthy families. And so, but men need to understand you got to be the priest of your household in a loving way, in a kind way, and respect your wife's Torah knowledge by all means. Yeah. No, seriously, you understand though. Exactly. So with that being said, the Sanhedrin, yes, there will be a Sanhedrin before Yeshua returns because Matthew 24 tells us there will be. And so with me, that's Elijah because Elijah is the only one that can put the Sanhedrin back together. And Elijah comes before Yeshua just like he did 2,000 years ago, right? So again, Elijah's coming. This time, the first time he comes as Hanavi. The next time he comes as Hatishbi, the captive, the root word captive. The next time, Hagiladi. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Yahu Hagiladi. And the third time he says it 3 times. Eli. And I know it's a silly song, but it means something. It's not a silly song. It's very important. So that's why, to me, I get excited because the Sanhedrin has to be set back up again. Now, let's look at the flip side. What are Christians going to say? That's not a good thing for them. They see that as bad. And the funny thing is, most Christians say the sacrificial system, oh, that's bad, but it's got to start. How do we know the sacrificial system is going to start? Isaiah chapter 2. Everybody will go up to the mountain of the Lord. Well, I've been having Randy, yes, a friend of mine, Randy Field, called me the other day, and he said he's got this situation about people that are, he thought everybody understood the sacrificial system was going to start. And it blew my mind because I'm having the same thing with another person just recently, within the last 2 weeks, and I'd already done the research. And I said, what is going to start? And so I didn't realize that's the biggest lineup right now the enemy is going to bring to take people away from this movement. You guys, y'all been around me way too long, so most of y'all, when you talk about sacrifices, it don't really scare you. The average Messianic is terrified of sacrifices. They think, oh my God, no, there'll be no more sacrifices. Jesus was the last sacrifice. What's that got to do with anything? So if you've been around me long enough, I've been planted this in your head to understand that there is a sacrificial system coming. But the other side says it's bad.
And you've implanted that not by speaking something that's not true, but by
Showing
us in the Word.
Exactly.
Okay, so those who say that Yeshua was the last sacrifice, how do they explain that it went on for 70 more years? Yeah, but still, I mean, if God meant for it to be done away with, it would have stopped then.
Well, then Paul took a Nazarite vow and went to the temple and offered the sacrifices for that. And he's an apostle, so we
Okay, so one of the questions the other day, somebody said, Randy, in chapter 40 to the end of the book of Ezekiel, why did that make you think that's the millennial temple? I was like, because that temple's never been built. In Ezekiel, that temple has to be built or he's a false prophet. Now let's listen to what Isaiah says. That's one. Zechariah 14 says water comes out both sides, it comes out from the right side of the altar. Ezekiel talks about that water coming from the right side of the altar. Zechariah 14 is talking about the millennial temple. So we know that temple in Ezekiel is the millennial temple. Now listen to Isaiah. And it will happen in the end of days that the mountain of the temple of Yah, we just read over that, oh, it's just a mountain of Yah. No, the temple of Yah will be firmly established at the head of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many people will go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Hashem, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of Hashem from Jerusalem. He will judge among the nations. He will settle the argument of many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, the spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not lift a sword against nation, and they will no longer study warfare. That's never happened. We have never turned our our swords into pruning hooks. We've always had war. And so that verse has never happened. If there's not a millennial temple, then Isaiah's a false prophet too, correct? I look at things real simple. There has to be a temple. Now, wait a minute. Temple means offerings. It's not one or the other. Temple, offerings, because Ezekiel says offerings and a temple and water from the right side of the altar. And Zechariah talked about that water coming out of the altar, how big it gets. So anyway. Hey, enjoy it. We'll get about 20 or 30 more of those. It'll be fun. Okay, so who's reading? Did we finish that chapter?
Yeah, we're on chapter 40.
Okay, chapter 40. You want to go, Mary?
Yeah, I can read.
All right, go.
Your print this week.
Any questions about the Sanhedrin before we go any further? Do you understand now why?
I think that was a good discussion.
But you kind of understand now why, right? There has to be a Sanhedrin to set the most important thing in the Sanhedrin. The two things. Number one, check a prophet. And number two, calendar. So if that's the two most important things, then who does Elijah go to? The Sanhedrin. Why? Because they're going to find out if he's a real prophet or not. So that's where we are.
And who's that going to be?
Is that and here's the thing, Ray, is that a movement or is it a person or is it both? I'm convinced it's Messianic. I'm convinced that that person, that movement, is Judaism allowing us to participate with the sacrificial system. Because Judah stood up for Benjamin. And in this context, Benjamin had the cup, sacrifices. Anyway, there's a lot of ways looking at it. But, okay, Mary.
Chapter 40. Adonai said to Moshe, on the first day of the month, you are to set up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, put it in the ark for the testimony, and conceal the ark with the curtain. Bring the table and arrange its display. Bring in the menorah and light its lamps. See the gold altar for incense in front of the ark for the testimony, and set up the screen at the entrance to the tabernacle. Place the altar for burnt offerings in front of the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. Set up the courtyard all the way around, and hang up the screen for the entrance to the courtyard. Take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and everything in it. Consecrate it with all its furnishings, then it will be holy. Anoint the altar for burnt offerings with all its utensils. Consecrate the altar, then the altar will be especially holy. Anoint the basin and its base and consecrate it. Then bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent meeting and wash them with water. Put the holy garments on Aaron, anoint him and consecrate him so that he can serve me in the office of Kohen. Bring his sons, put tunics on them, and anoint them as you anointed their father, so that they can serve me in the office of Kohen. Their anointing will signify that the office of Kohen is theirs throughout all their generations. Moshe did this. He acted in accordance with everything Adonai had ordered him to do. On the first day of the first month of the second year, the tabernacle was set up. Moshe erected the tabernacle, put its sockets in place, put up its planks, and put its crossbars and set up its posts. He spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent above it, as Adonai had ordered Moshe.
So I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking about how heavy these things are that we just got through talking about. Yah tells him to do all these things, and it says that Moshe did these things. So just the Ark of the Covenant was 185 pounds. He just said, let it be.
No. Think about it. The guy that does the opera.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the rabbi said Moshe went like this, and it all stood up.
Yeah, that's what me and Johnny were talking about this morning. Because
Kind of
otherwise,
like the ark getting built, like there was some help in there somewhere, right?
Well, I agree.
yeah.
But
No, you're talking about
but the rabbis say
What he's saying is the rabbi's saying that Moshe just spoke it.
Moshe spoke it, and that's what he did. Moshe went like this, and it all stood up.
Because otherwise, I mean, you think about how heavy the tent is.
Right.
I mean, think about some of the tents that we try to put up by ourselves today, and
Okay.
one man can't even do it.
And another verse says Moshe he waved Aaron before Yah, and the rabbis say Moshe picked Aaron up and waved him, literally waved him and stuff. So they say some funny things, and sometimes they don't actually mean what they're using it as a teaching lesson. So I don't believe that Moses did all this himself. I believe that when he did it, he was in charge of it.
Yeah.
So if he did this, it's like if you go home and you build something, but everybody's helping you do it, you're in charge of it. So you're the one doing it. And so,
But I don't say that I built it. I say we built it.
well, but in this sense, he said, basically saying Moshe's in charge of all this. But later on, it changes where it become Aaron is in charge of it. And so that's my theory on it.
I mean,
So,
I was just really like reading through this, going like how I mean, we obviously know that Moshe was strong. I mean, it says that he was.
right,
We know all the things that he was able to accomplish, and even at 120 years old, that we're going to read in Deuteronomy, that he was still strong as could be. There was nothing wrong with him.
right.
So,
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Who conquered the promised land? Joshua or Yah? Well, it says Yah did, but then it says Joshua came in and led. But it says Yah, I defeated all the inhabitants, blah, blah, blah. And so we use that same context for the temple, though. What you just said is way too many people are looking at the temple and say, no, we back up and the temple comes from heaven. We've given blueprints of the temple in Ezekiel. We've given everything. So why do you give us blueprints if he's going to want to build it and bring it from heaven? Unless we did the same thing in Joshua. Joshua came in and conquered the land, but Yah says, I did it. I conquered the land. I brought you in and I did this. So my theory is that we're going to build the temple, but we're not really the one doing it. He's the one doing it.
I mean, could you imagine, like, if Moshe built this by, and I'm kind of stuck on this, like, I understand the way that things are put together. Like, I mean, think about, like, IKEA. Like, think about how struggle it is to put together some of those components without another hand.
Exactly. And pulling that curtain up alone over top of those things, I mean, he couldn't have done it on his own. It was heavy.
So, does the scripture also say that, like, Moses was supposed to build the tabernacle by himself, like, the way that
I'm sorry?
the way that Hashem showed him, it says that he's supposed to build the tabernacle, right? So that comes from heaven. So it's heaven coming down, and he's shown the vision of how to do it, but he didn't build it by himself.
Yeah, everybody
No.
else built it.
Right.
Right.
Everybody else built the components.
Right.
And so it also says that,
But he also showed Bezalel everything, too. It wasn't just Moses that saw everything. Hashem opened up Bezalel's eyes, Aholivah. These two, they saw it. And then probably everybody helping them also saw a vision that when Moses, say Bezalel. So he's sitting there and says, okay, I had a dream, and it's like this right here. And somebody else says, oh, wait a minute. Well, I think I saw that too. So they all saw it together because they all worked together. So that's the way I would take it. Okay.
you have to be really big and really strong to do it by himself.
But hold on. So the rabbi said when he did this, and it stood up the temple, and then he went like that, and it all lay back down. So sometimes the rabbis will teach something, and somebody will take it out of context, and they'll say, well, my rabbi said this, so it must be true. Well, wait a minute. Maybe it's just a teaching lesson. He's trying to get you to understand something else.
It's usually a thought process that's spiritual being made to be physical. Like, a lot of people take spiritual thought processes and try to make them physical when that's not it can't
Right.
happen. Like, when he said he did this, he's talking in a spiritual manner, right? And they're saying, oh, well, he just did this, and it was like magic.
Yeah. Okay.
Verse 16? No? But I will start it at Moshe erected the tabernacle.
Yeah, I think you're at 20. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. He took and put the testimony inside the ark, put the poles on the ark, and set the ark cover above on the ark. Then he brought the ark into the tabernacle, set up the curtain as a secret, and concealed the ark for the testimony as Adonai had ordered Moshe. He put the table in the tent of meeting on the side of the tabernacle facing north, outside the curtain. He arranged a row of bread on it before Adonai, and Adonai had ordered Moshe. He put the menorah in the tent of meeting across from the table on the side of the tabernacle facing south. Then he lit the lamps before Adonai as Adonai had ordered Moshe. He set the gold altar in the tent of meeting in front of the curtain and burned on the incense made from aromatic spices as Adonai had ordered Moshe. He set up the screen at the entrance to the tabernacle. The altar for burnt offerings he placed at the entrance to the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and offered it on the burnt offering and the grain offering as Adonai had ordered Moshe. He set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it for washing, so that Moshe and Aaron and his sons could wash their hands and feet there, so that they could wash when entering the tent of meeting and when approaching the altar, as Adonai had ordered Moshe. Finally, he erected the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar and set up the screen for the entrance to the courtyard. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Moshe was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud remained on it, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Wow. Whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel continued with all their travels. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not travel onward until the day when it was taken up. For the cloud of Adonai was above the tabernacle during the day, and the fire was in the cloud at night, so that all the house of Israel could see through all of their travels.
Okay, let's do our kazak, and then we'll talk about some stuff. Kazak, venik, kazak. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. Okay, let's talk about this year Passover. And then we're going to talk, we got plenty of time, and then let's talk about the Passover 2,000 years ago. So somebody pull up your Bible Works or your eSword and look up the word week in the King James Bible. Look up the word week in the New Testament, because I'm going to need that for the next study. This year, Pesach is on, okay, the 14th of Aviv, Monday night. Okay, so right here at sunset between Monday and Tuesday, that's the home Seder. That's actually home Seder. That's actually Pesach. Okay, so this is Tuesday is the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, it is a holy day. Now, it's a Sabbath. It's not a weekly Sabbath. That's Tuesday. The weekly Sabbath is right here. Now, when we get into Passover, when we start talking about the Omer count to Pentecost, you're going to see a big difference. Most Messianics, they're going to go down here after the weekly Sabbath, which will be the Sunday of the next week, and that's when they'll start counting to Pentecost. But Judaism starts the day after the first holy day. So the first unleavened bread, the second day of unleavened bread is just a weekday. It is first fruits. Now, somebody go to Deuteronomy 16, verses 8. Deuteronomy 16:8, not the 7 or 8. It's talking about the 6 days.
6 days you eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there is a closing festival to Yah, your Elohim. You do no work.
Okay, now hold on. Now watch this. So we have 6 days and we have 7 days. How long is the Feast of Unleavened Bread? It's 7 days, right? Okay, but what's this 6 days here? Okay, now, if you don't understand context, this is where you get way off track. The 6 days starts on the day of first fruits, and I'll explain why. What is it that comes ripe by Passover that we make our barley? We make our Passover out of, our Passover matzah. Now, we're not allowed to use the new barley because barley is actually one of the first fruits. Barley, wheat, and then we got figs, grapes, I think I got these out of order, pomegranates, then we got olive oil, olives, and then we got date honey. Those are the 7 first fruits in the land. Well, 2 of the first fruits are also the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Now, for those of you reading King James, there's no corn in there. Corn is a New World product. It says corn, but that's a New World product.
Corn in Scripture refers to any grain with an ear, with the little pieces of grain to it that grow on it like this, like it does on corn, like wheat.
So, if you grow, this is biblically commanded. Wheat, barley, if you grow any of these 5 grains, you're commanded to tithe on it. Rabbinically, they tithe on anything you grow. But biblically, those are the 5 you have to tithe on. The first fruits, if you grow any of these first fruits, you have to give the first portion to the priesthood. Okay? Now, but 2 of these first fruits are actually grain. So now you got to understand the difference between communal and personal. Okay, so if I grow barley, I got to pull off my first fruits, give it over to the priesthood. That's personal. Communal, for the nation, I'm not allowed to eat any of my barley until the priesthood make a first fruit offering wave before God, which they do on this day right here. So once they make that offering right here, then I can make my new matzah out of that fresh grain that I just collected, okay? Same thing with wheat, except wheat goes to Shavuot. It's a later product. So I'm not allowed to eat any of the wheat until I give the priest their portion, and then the priesthood, they wave the portion that they collect for the nation, they wave with these wheat loaf breads. They wave before God. So I'm not allowed to eat any of that. Now these other things, from right here down, figs, grapes, pomegranates, olive oil, and date honey. I'm not allowed to eat my figs when I harvest them until I give the priest a portion. That don't mean you can't just walk out and eat fresh figs and stuff like that. But once I give the priest their portion, then I can eat all those I've harvested as well. But these are all personal. But the first two are actually communal because it actually works at the temple. So, that 6 days you read starts right here. What's that?
That's what you said to look up.
Sabbathon? Okay. So right here, that verse that Ray read, for 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread. The unleavened bread is 7 days long. It starts on Tuesday. But the first day is a holy day. I have to eat leavening from the grain I collected the year before. But as soon as the next day comes, the second day of unleavened bread, then I can start with that 6 days now of my fresh grain. So that's 1 of 6, but it's also 2 of 7 because this is the first day of the 7 days. So these days run together. And then I get to the weekly Sabbath. Okay, let's see. First day, second day, third day, fifth day, the 6th day, and the 7th day. So the first day of unleavened bread is a holy day, and the last day. So this year, Tuesday, and this is on April the 23rd, I believe. April the 23rd is Tuesday, is a holy day, and then 7 days later, on the Monday, is a holy day. That's why that verse doesn't contradict. Now, let's have some fun. Any questions about this? Okay, so I think most of you guys have been around long enough. Y'all heard this 100 times. Now, let's have some fun with this. Who got the week? Okay, in the King James Bible, the word week is mentioned 9 times in the New Testament. Okay, now, Beth, did you pull them up on your...
What?
Did you pull up the word week in the New Testament?
I did.
Oh, okay. Go to... That's what you were showing me. So, is that... Does it give the verses?
Yeah, it's Matthew 28:1.
I'll start with Matthew 28:1. If somebody go to Matthew 28:1 and read it for me. Yeah.
But late in the Sabbath, as it was drawing into day 1 of the week, Miriam from Magdala and the other Miriam came to see the tomb.
Okay, the word week there is the Strong's number 4521. And the first word, Sabbath, is the Strong's number 4521. The same word. So, 9 times in the New Testament, they translated the word week, the word Sabbath, as week. Why would they do that? Okay. Nobody can translate without a bias. No matter how neutral you think you are, you cannot translate without a bias because you're going to translate the way you understand, right? Okay, so Matthew 28:1. As the end of the Sabbath, it dawned toward the first day of the week. That sounds like we're going from Saturday to Sunday, right? Okay, the word day's not in there. It's in italics. So if you're in the King James, then that means it's not there. They put the word in there. So is the end of the Sabbath toward the first, it don't say day of the week, before the first of the week, Mary Magdalene, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, since that's the exact same word, if anybody's got the Young's Literal, you're to read it in the Young's Literal. It says, at the end of the Sabbath, it began to dawn toward the first of the Sabbaths. Now, what does that mean?
You know what's funny is me and this, I met a gentleman in, where was I at? Anyways, I was somewhere in Missouri, and this guy came up to witness to me. And so then me and him just shared testimonies of ourselves and everything like that, and he was super excited to know that I was Messianic. And but this is one of the things that he brought up over and over and over. He said it's the first day of the week. The first day of the week. He said it says it over and over and over in the New Testament, the first day of the week. He said that's why we do it on Sunday. He said that's why we worship on Sunday.
But he did actually keep
But he did
like
keep,
a true Sabbath.
he did. He
even
was
though kept it
he
on
was a
Sunday.
Sunday Sabbath
He
keeper.
doesn't
He doesn't buy he didn't buy or sell. He doesn't do any work. He sanctifies the Sunday to do worship.
Okay, so how long was Messiah in the grave?
3 days, 3 nights.
3 nights. So 3 times 24, 48, 72. Yeshua's in the ground for 72 hours, right? No, doesn't say that. It says 3 days and 3 nights. Now, what if it's just a second of that first day and just a few seconds of that last night? The reason I'm saying this is in Judaism, just a very bit of a part of a day is that day. So we get this ideal 72 hours, 3 days, 3 nights. That's our trying to interpret from our understanding. Okay, now, has anybody got Young's? Okay, so Young's Literal, Matthew 28, verse 1. You got Young's Literal? Okay, read Matthew 28, 1 in Young's Literal.
And on the eve of the Sabbaths, at the dawn toward the first of the Sabbaths, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre.
Okay, so on the eve of the Sabbath, the first holy day of unleavened bread is the Sabbath, correct? And then you got the weekly Sabbath. So on the eve of the Sabbath, at the dawn toward the first of the Sabbaths. In Judaism, if I say the first of the Sabbaths, we're talking about the weekly Sabbath during the week of unleavened bread. Okay? You got to understand that. With the first of the Sabbath, there's 7 Sabbaths, 7 of those counting to Pentecost. Okay, now look at the word week. I'm going to need one learner for this one. Week. And John. Where's it at in John? And stay in Young's Literal. Actually, I'm going to need you to do both in King James and Young's Literal. 20, what is it now?
Verse 1.
In verse 20, chapter 20?
Uh-huh.
Is that the only other place?
And 20 verse 19.
2019, that's it. Okay.
It says, on the first of the Sabbaths, Mary the Magdalene doth come early, there being yet darkness, to the tomb, and she seeth the stone having been taken away out of the tomb.
That's in Young's Literal.
Young's Literal.
Now read it in the King James, if you can.
Not New King James, King James?
KJV, yeah.
KJV. Says,
KJV 20, verse 19.
The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre.
Okay, so now we got one is Sunday morning, and this one is the first of the Sabbath, as the dawning of the first of the Sabbath. When does the Sabbath dawn? I know, but we're talking King James, and then you got all these people say King James only Bible. I mean, come on, guys. How many of you have heard this? If the King James is good enough for Paul, it's good enough for me. Okay. No, you think I'm kidding. She thinks I'm kidding. I've heard that before. No, I'm serious. I have had people tell me that before. If the King James Bible was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for me. King James was 400 years ago. Okay, now, Young's literal. One more time, Ray.
And on the first of the Sabbaths, Mary the Magdalene doth come early, there being yet darkness, to the tomb, and she seeth the stone having been taken away out of the tomb.
Now, I'm going to take you back to Jim Lewis. Jim taught us this lesson called the bone of the day. I forget the exact Hebrew phrase, but not only is it the same day of the week, but it's also the same day on the Hebrew calendar, but it's also the same day of the week. Now, what day do you think we left Egypt? Anybody know? We know. We can go, okay, we go in, on the Exodus, at one point it says, and this was the first Rosh Chodesh, or this was Rosh Chodesh. And then it says, I'm going to give you manna for 6 days. And the seventh day I'm not going to give you manna. So he was talking to him on Sabbath. And he said it's Rosh Chodesh. So we can take that and we can backtrack and we know what day we left Egypt on. Now, I'm not going to tell you because I want you to find it on your, well, I'm going to tell you because I got to show you. But anyway, when the first time I found it, I was so excited. And I looked at Judaism, they said the exact same thing. I was like, oh, that is so cool. But I found it on my own. So that's the beauty of Scriptures. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the honor of kings to search it out. If you find something on your own before anybody, even if everybody else knows it, but you find it on your own, you're supposed to feel like a king. That's the way God made the Scriptures for you. Okay, so we left Egypt Wednesday night was the Passover. Thursday was the holy day. That's when we left Egypt. Now, I'm going to... Okay, so Wednesday evening and morning. The beginning part of a day is the night part. As soon as the sun sets, that's the beginning of the day. Evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, morning. Now I got to start here. Wait.
I know it's confusing. I've gone through.
Okay. Now, this is what. Now remember, we got to get rid of the idea of 72 hours, okay? So on John chapter 20, verse 19, Yeshua was already resurrected, and it was the beginning of the Sabbath, correct? And then a little bit later, it says the Jews were gathered together, and Yeshua stood in their midst. It was on Shabbat. Right at the beginning of Shabbat. They had already been resurrected. Now watch this. So, we left Egypt on Thursday. That afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, is when we slaughtered the Passover lamb. Yeshua, I believe Yeshua was crucified Wednesday afternoon, during the evening, morning means daytime. It was in the afternoon. Just a portion of that day is that first day. As soon as the sun set, now we have the first evening. As soon as the sun comes up the next day on Thursday, we have the second day. As soon as the sun goes down, we have the second evening. As soon as the sun comes up on Friday morning, we have the third day. And as soon as the sun sets, Friday afternoon, we have the third evening. I believe Yeshua was resurrected at that, right between the 6th and the 7th day. Now, the rabbis say something interesting about this. It's neither this day nor that day, but yet it's both. Twilight is this day or that day. Now, the reason I'm saying this, there's no way you can get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday afternoon crucifixion and Sunday morning resurrection. Can't happen. And we just read, now, the other Gospels, look at the word week. It's the Strong's number, and do this research yourself. 4521. It's the word week in the New Testament. In Matthew 28, verse 1, the same word is used as Sabbath and week. In the exact same sentence, they translate the same word 2 different ways. Now think about that right here.
That's where I was going with that. I mean, if he had to be taken off the cross because it was
But what Shabbat was he talking about? The first day of unleavened bread.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Now, see, most people say that had to be the weekly Sabbath. And by convincing people we're talking about the weekly Sabbath, then it takes away this whole concept. Then we get in,
It's the high Sabbath of the first day of.
but it is a Sabbath.
Yes, it is a Sabbath. This is not the regular Sabbath that happens.
It's not the weekly Sabbath.
Okay, so Saturday is not the only occurrence of Shabbat.
No.
Correct. We have high Sabbath on the feast.
And that was what our Josh was about this morning.
Learn about that.
Okay, and that was in conjunction with the whole Passover
Yes,
thing, right?
correct.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Because otherwise, if it was the weekly Sabbath, then Yeshua would be a liar because he said that I'll be in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights.
And the way that
But he doesn't say 72 hours. You got to go back to a Jewish mindset. Just a portion of a day is that first day. And remember, he died in the afternoon. Now, look at this from a completely different angle. Now, watch this.
Okay, I didn't realize Shabbat meant more than Saturday.
Now, watch this. Completely different angle. There's a resurrection at the beginning of the 1,000-year Sabbath, right? And there's also a resurrection at the end of the 1,000-year Sabbath. 1,000-year Sabbath, we're entering in that seventh day. And as we get to the beginning of that seventh day, there's a resurrection between the sixth day and the seventh day of the righteous. And then at the very end of Revelations, after the 1,000 years, there's another resurrection. So we're talking about a resurrection right here. And Yeshua, of course, 2,000 years ago, the day of the week matches up my same thing I'm trying to say now. What I am trying to say now, Christianity comes out, and most of the scholars will say this right here. They'll say, nowhere in the New Testament did Jesus change the worship day from Saturday to Sunday. But since he was resurrected Sunday morning, that's why we worship on Sunday.
Oh, and they've got that all wrong.
You see what I'm saying? It's changed everything. Now, the number one verse to remember, Matthew 28, verse 1. It has both words in it, week and Sabbath, but they're the exact same Hebrew word. And it's not even, it's written in Hebrew, translated into Greek, and never, how many languages have we got now? But the Torah is all Hebrew. We understand Torah. And this doesn't contradict Torah. Well, actually, this is the exact same pattern of leaving Egypt. Yeshua was the original Passover lamb that saved us in Egypt. And not only is it the same day of the week, right here Wednesday afternoon, Yeshua was crucified. That's my theory.
well in
But look how confusing it is. I mean,
Jeremiah it says that we learned all of these deceptions from our fathers who passed them down, so on and so forth. It's not because like
what is iniquity?
I don't even think that it's because they're like maliciously doing it. I think the malicious happened and now they're just passing down what they've learned.
Okay, now, the best part about it is they're not doing it intentionally. The enemy did it intentionally. He knew. Well, but it wasn't time. I don't even think they'll bear the responsibility because it wasn't time. But here's the deal. No, think about what I'm saying. We're in a new time now where God's starting to open people's eyes all over the world. I mean, there's people coming out of the churches right and left that are starting to understand that, okay, we've been duped. Okay, so I can't judge people because only he can do that. And so I don't even know, but I mean, until their eyes are open, can they even see it?
I mean, the ones who, and that's why I said they wouldn't bear that burden of responsibility because the ones who initiated it way back when, they would bear that burden of responsibility for leading people astray from the truth, right?
What is iniquity? This is the best one yet. But I'll remember the iniquity of the fathers to the children's children, blah, blah, blah. Iniquity is sins that you pass down unknowingly. Think about that. So when you do, okay, let's say that you pick up a new cool tradition for Christmas. Well, okay, so now we got iniquity being passed down because that wasn't something, or not a tradition, something that some pagans did. We want to add this to our little Christian thing. And now it becomes iniquity. You know what worship means? Most people have no idea what worship means. Avodah means to work. You work for a God, you worship that God. So the little lady that cleans the synagogue, she's worshiping God while she's doing that. When you go to the grocery store and you're buying your groceries and you're, yeah,
When you're making your challah,
you're worshiping God. Exactly. When you're having Friday night meals with your children and putting the blessings on them, you're worshiping God. You're worshiping not just God, you're worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, I know this is going to be a big challenge, but go right here to Matthew 28, verse 1, and do the math yourself. Look up the word week, the Strong's number 4521, and look at it in the New Testament. Am I saying that you can't use this word to say the word week? No, I'm not saying that. Because it can mean a week, but it don't always mean a week. It's taken out of context. So, any questions? That's one you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. It's also thought that it's the first of the weeks, too, like
The weeks counting to Shavuot.
Shavuot, like the
Feast of Weeks. It's a root word 7, so yes.
and so, cause they translated it as the first day of the week, when it could be translated to the first of weeks.
But it says the first of the Sabbaths.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing, like,
Well, yeah,
first of Sabbath, the first
Right.
of weeks, in that context is the same thing.
right.
Because you have, what, 7 Sabbaths?
But regardless, if you really read it in context, when John, and I like John's interpretation better than the others, in John 20, verse 19, it clearly says, in the Sabbath, the first of the Sabbath, Yeshua had already been resurrected. He had already appeared to them. And that matches up with what's coming in Revelations. We got 1,000-year Sabbath. That 1,000-year Sabbath coming, that 1,000 years the saints will reign with Jesus, Yeshua, that's a Sabbath. We have 6 days and a Sabbath, 6 years and a Sabbath, 6,000 years and a millennium, 1,000-year Sabbath. So if you understand that, if you're going to keep the 1,000-year Sabbath, you got to very minimum keep the 6-day Sabbath. But it's right there. So look it up, make your own charts, and see what you come up with. But no matter what happens, you can't get a Sunday morning resurrection and a Friday afternoon crucifixion. Any other questions?
I'm going to share this graph on our signal page.
Okay,
It shows exactly what you're talking about.
okay.
So Lisa, if you want to check this out, I'm going to post it on that signal page.
All right. Any other comments or questions? We got time. Anything you need to discuss about Passover?
If any of you missed them last year or the year before or whatever, I printed off those 2 charts up there that explain what he was talking about with the scripture verses in it. So here's during the gospel, during the Passion Week of Yeshua, and here's how it
All right. Turn out the lights. The party's over.